Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So for a while I have been trying to get back into making more champion guides and reviews, and hopefully today is the start of a fairly frequent champion guide and ability breakdown videos. And in today's video we are going to be talking about big bad boy Knull himself. Now I do have a Knull at SIG 200 rank 3, and he's one of the most likely cosmic champions I'm going to take up in the near future. But in the first part of the video, I want to explain what makes him good, what are his drawbacks, and what are kind of like interesting things about him before we get into the gameplay, damage, and all the rest of the things. So first things first, base points. So the good stuff is that he has loads of debuffs and also easy to access debuffs. With his SIG ability, he starts with like 13, which is more than enough, or 15, 13, 15, something like that, which is more than enough to max out inequity bonus, so you automatically reduce opponent's modified attack by like 36%. He obviously synergizes extremely well with Despair. Also, if you have maxed out Despair, you need like 7 debuffs to completely shut down opponent's healing. With max SIG ability, he goes well beyond that point. Basically, opponents are persistently heal blocked unless they are immune to regeneration rate modification, like Weapon X, for instance, or Toad. So that is awesome. Having this great of a synergy with Despair and Inequity not only makes him more utilitarian offensively, but also makes him tougher defender to deal with, because Inequity plus Knull can be a very, very painful and long fight in combination with his combat power rate reduction on defense, which is automatic every time you cross a combo meter. So, easy to access, true accuracy. It is as passive ability, so there is no buff, and he has a unique hit in that way. But yes, all of his medium, heavy attacks and many of his special hits are basically unavoidable. They have true accuracy, so you can't auto-block them, so you can't evade from them, which obviously lets him quite easily go up against foes like Mordor, for instance, which is something that I'm going to show later in the video. He has an absolutely massive damage ramp-up potential, and he can become extremely high DPS character. Obviously, we all know that Knull is extremely recoil-friendly. Now, fair point, I will be running Knull in all of the fights today without recoil. So any damage output that you are going to be taking away from Knull in today's video, obviously, is significantly higher should he have recoil active. And also the fact that he has relatively easy playstyle. Especially once you kind of know what you're doing, there isn't that much of a timer watching unless you go for a specific station. Now, bad things, he relies on debuffs entirely, and more specifically, he relies on armor breaks. If opponents like degen immune or degen resistant or bleed immune, that's not a deal breaker at all. But if they shrug off all the debuffs or rely on armor breaks, or armor break immunity completely does him over. He also, unfortunately, has extremely bad starting damage. It's kind of like eye bomb until you get to your first level 2 and start inflicting acid poisons, acid burns. Nothing really happens there. Similar with Knull, until you trigger your first corruption, initially he has one of the worst damage output for modern champions, effectively. He really doesn't have anything going for him until you can throw your level 1 or level 3, wait for corruption to start, and then you do stuff. Right, further on, he's absolutely useless without access to specials, because level 1 or level 3 is the only way how you can get corruption started. Therefore, any matchups that he can't throw special attacks really reliably immediately become significantly more difficult. Now, reliant on max SIG for 95% of the content, and this is going to be debated. I know I'm going to get hate for this in the comments, but the main point here is that if you do want to use him for stuff like Battlegrounds or casual questing at the decent speed, you do want him at max SIG, because there is a major difference for short fights. For long fights, for abyss stuff, it's very good to have him at max SIG, but you can deal without it. Like, I used the relatively low signal for the Abyss Arena challenges, for instance, and it wasn't that big of a difference. But for Battlegrounds, for Alliance War, for virtually everything that is, what we do daily, you do want to have him at high sig, and yes, there is a very big difference. He's one of those champions where it's basically pointless to awaken him unless you're going to give him a ton of 6 downs. Now, signature ability ruins no buff design, and this is one of my biggest gripes with Knull, because having a kit for a Cosmic Champion that has 0 buffs is quite a huge deal, but it is kind of ruined by the fact that you get 2 buffs that last like 2 seconds only whenever you would enter Corruption. And that is his Awakened ability, which you do want to have, but obviously that can trigger Mystic Dispersion, that can trigger, Power Snack and things like that, and it's just quite frustrating that they went to very great lengths to have a Cosmic Champion that relies on 0 buffs, and rest of his effects can also be passives and stuff like that, and all of the emphasis on debuffs, and then they kind of ruined it with unstoppable and indestructible buffs, unstoppable and unblockable buffs in his Sig ability. Why not passives? Like, really, why not passives? And I'd love this champion much more. And this is especially noticeable, obviously, when fighting Mystic champions. And I'm kind of going to showcase it in the Mordor fight, but it was one of the reasons why I couldn't get a very solid run against the Mephisto, because whenever I entered Corruption, it just completely ruined, and I ate more level 3s than I should have. He's still viable against Mystic champions, more viable than virtually any other Cosmic champions, or most other Cosmic champions, but it is a bit rough. And complex fights can ruin the momentum, and this is mainly to do with you needing to either pause corruptions or throw plentiful special ones to reapply corruptions. And if you are hindered with that with something like Power Drain from Nimrod, he can still do Nimrod fight, but you need to be very careful when you throw your special attacks, because if you're going to get Power Drained, it's not going to be a fun time. And then neutral things, buff absent base kit is very unique for Cosmic, therefore he in many cases can be kind of like the most usable or one of the most usable Cosmic champions for like specific node combinations. And additionally, the fact that he's that debuff reliant and has no buffs make him have very unique class relationships. For instance, I would arguably say that he's weaker against majority of the skill defenders than he is against mystics. He, as a Cosmic champion, can still tackle stuff like Mephisto. He can take on Mordor and a handful of other, mystic defenders. There's nothing wrong with using Knull against Ebony Maw, let's say. And any mystic really that isn't armor break immune, which is something that they are releasing more frequently. But at the same time, he absolutely gets his lunch money stolen by like Mole Mans and Kingpins and Shang-Chi's, so on and so forth. So it is a bit unique class mix up there. He's obviously capable as attacker and as a defender, which is a huge plus for Battlegrounds and Alliance War purpose. I have used Knull personally offensively. Obviously, Knull is one of the staple defenders. And in Battlegrounds also, depending on the meta, he can be relatively effective offensively, but virtually in all of the metas, he can be at the very least decent defender. In some of the metas, he's very, very, very strong defender. And every single attack is contact physical. It's kind of worth pointing out, and this is something that I'm going to include as well. But in this case, obviously, it's nice to know that there is no energy damage. Therefore, you are not affected at all in any capacity by champions with high energy resistance or upcoming nodes, for instance, with high energy diet and stuff like that. Right, all that being said, let's get to some gameplay. So first off, like a basic rotation, and we're going to have a couple of Winter Soldier fights. And what I want to say that he applies his Living Abyss with his mediums and his heavies. He has about 60-70% chance to apply them. I do make a small mistake here, but that is basically his ramp up. Now, one of the most interesting things with Knull is you can kind of choose how long you want to spend in your ramp up phase. And then you can decide whether to go for level 1 or level 3, or how long are you going to be pumping up your Living Abyss. Now, in most of the short fights, level 1 rotation is what you want to go with. When opponents have like over 500k health pool, it evens out. You can either start with level 1s or go for level 3s. Basically, as soon as I will reach level 3, I will throw that, and then my damage phase is going to start. We can see that here, Winter Soldier, that 93% health, but I activate my level 3. I have 42 armor breaks now immediately converted, and obviously I hit a lot harder, and whenever I strike with my light hits, I inflict instant bleeds on the Winter Soldier, and whenever I finish my combo with a medium or drop a heavy attack or use a level 1, I convert some of the armor breaks into degens and Living Abyss. So in this type of rotation, what you want to do is just throw your level 3, be super aggressive. Their power gain is reduced for their combat power rate is reduced by each armor break up to 65% basically. So they are gaining significantly less power, allowing you to be even more aggressive. So obviously if you have full ramp up, then you can even, reduce the combat power rate further. But even right now, it's noticeable that for each armor break, opponent's combat power rate is reduced. And I'm just being like, again, yet super aggressive. I'm dropping my level 2s, inflicting decent amount of damage there, decent crit instant bleeds as well. And at this point, we can see that Winter Soldier is basically dead with 49 armor breaks and 3 Living Abyss there. Solid damage output, and that's 90 some hits, 6-star rank 3, 1 minute 54. Not the fastest, but obviously, again, this isn't like a super length fight either. The thing that will kind of surprise you here is going to be the next kind of like a basic rotation, where I'm just going to be relying on level 1s. And this is going to be a completely kind of different strategy, relying significantly less on the instant bleeds and significantly more on degens. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be getting to nearly 2 bars of power whilst ramping up as many Living Abyss as I can with basically medium combos or medium combos initially. And then I will throw my level 1 when I'm nearly at 2 bars of power, trying to squeeze in as many Living Abyss as I can before we kind of enter our damage phase, because afterwards it's significantly harder. Whilst you're corrupted, you basically can't increase your damage further. You kind of decide what you're working with. That's also the reason why in short to medium fights, Awakened ability is super important. And now basically we're just going to be spamming our level 1s and finishing combos with mediums, and by doing that we are converting our armor breaks back into Living Abyss, and every time we enter corruption, all the Living Abyss get converted back to armor breaks, and it's kind of like an infinite cycle there, where we cycle from armor breaks to Living Abyss, from armor breaks to Living Abyss, and in the process inflicting a ton of degeneration. Also healing. If you notice, I did get hit earlier in the fight, but every time you do convert your armor breaks into Living Abyss, you also regenerate, and that regen can be quite noticeable, on top of the fact that he would be healing with Liquid Courage Double Edge, because he is 65% bleed and poison resistant and 40% degen resistant. He does have extremely good healing capabilities even without Liquid Courage Double Edge active, but if you do have those masteries on him, then he can be an absolute healing machine. And here we can see that the entire point rotation is basically the same. I'm just spamming level 1s and kind of going from armor breaks into Living Abyss. And then whenever my corruption gets reactivated, it kind of starts all over again, finishes with 100% health, and basically the same amount of time. There's like virtually no difference. So for this length of a fight, you can kind of choose go for level 3 or just spam level 1s. Obviously, by extension, anything below 500k health pools, you are much likely better off just spamming your level 1s, and you will be quicker. There is obviously level 2, and level 2 can give you like 10 armor breaks when you activate it whilst in corruption. And that can work, but in most of the cases, I personally do not recommend going for that level 2, because it can inflict problems in the fight, pending how aggressive you are capable of being. Because if your corruption expires and you don't have a new one aligned, you can lose virtually all of your ramp up, and it is much riskier to do. We can see that the armor breaks start expiring if the corruption is not active. And if they do, here we can see that I barely salvaged them. And the rest of the fight is going to be basically me just trying to get as many of those armor breaks converted back into the Living Abyss so I can salvage most of them. It's kind of weird that it doesn't let me, start with the ones that are expiring the soonest, but it kind of converts from other way around, I would say. And at some point, I will actually lose my armor breaks, and level 2 can be incorporated, and it can be a significant damage dealer, as we saw from the level 3 rotation. But in most of the short to medium fights, again, I recommend sticking to level 1s, because it gives you kind of much more freedom and much more of a safety net there. Yes, you cannot increase your damage output further, but at least you are at no real risk of losing your ramp up and losing your armor breaks. So that is that. Obviously, this wouldn't be a Knull showcase if I wouldn't choke him against Star-Lord. And I'm going to fast forward through the initial ramp up phase here. It's going to be quite boring because I do want to get him up to 99 Living Abyss. I'm going to get clapped somewhere as well, but that's going to be a great way to showcase his heal. So I'm ramping him up here, and I'm not necessarily doing the best job, but what is important to note that this video now is at 3 minute and 15 second mark when we're activating level 3. 3 minutes and 20 seconds now. This has expired. Obviously, we hit the damage cap, and now obviously the damage is going through the roof. Our light hits basically are dealing like 20k damage when they crit, because you get like 8k instant bleed, 13k crit. And now I'm just going to be siphoning to, now I'm just going to be rushing to level 2s initially, whilst I still have a significant duration on this long level 3 corruption active. Actually get to 109 armor breaks here, hitting even harder. What is important to know though, whenever you will re-enter corruption, you can only have a maximum of 109 Living Abyss. So you kind of lose a bit of ramp up if you ramp up this much once you start re-entering the corruption. So I probably should not have ramped up to 99 Living Abyss. Going to 80 or 90 would have been fine. But here we can see that as I'm talking here, Star-Lord has basically lost almost half his health pool in mere moments. Now I have 24k medium there, and again here I'm going to go for level 1 just to make sure that I do have a new corruption cooking, so to speak. But you can see that it also came with like a massive regeneration there, and I was about 50% health or something like that, and obviously I'm capable of recovering so much health so quickly here, and we're cooking back up. We're at 90%, and that Star-Lord is still absolutely melting. He's barely gaining any power. You can notice that I'm squeezing in many combos before he even reaches a single bar of power. Now here is that unblockable coming in handy, letting me basically block break. Now I'm at 88% health. I think I'm gonna go for a nice chunky level 2 here again. A ton of damage there. It's like probably like a couple 100k there, but the cool thing is that virtually every single time we touch Star-Lord, he's losing such a huge chunk of health. And now obviously I'm back to full perfect yellow bar with 100% health, and that Star-Lord kid is about nuked, right? It's not gonna last much longer here. He's gonna bait out that level 2 and go for a level 1 of my own as well here. Tons of damage, tons of numbers floating in there, and the fight is over. So the important thing here is this clip now is at 5 minutes and 50 seconds. So virtually all of the Star-Lord's health went down in like 2 minutes something. It's sub 300 hit fight in total to deal with 3.3 million health. Next up, we have a Battlegrounds length fight. So this is a Deadpool from 641, and this is basically exactly the type of health pool that you would typically be facing in Battlegrounds, and this would be more or less a Battlegrounds, speed type of fight. And here is going to be here is first of all a great showcase of his Living Abyss completely shutting down opponents' regeneration, in this case Deadpool's. And now, as I said, I build up to just below 2 bars of power, activate my level 1, then I still want to get in as many mediums or heavies as I can in order to stack up some extra Living Abyss. And now he enters Corruption when I had 39 Living Abyss, and what I do, I just throw my level 1, inflict a ton of degen. Now I just need to bait out his level 2, and we're basically going to be going in for the kill here, because I go for another level 1, and Corruption reapplies. Voila, I'm back at 39 armor breaks, and the guy's just melting. And this entire fight was 53 seconds. So that is perfectly acceptable fight in Battlegrounds. Obviously, there are champions that are faster than it, but what I'm trying to say here is that Knull is viable for Battlegrounds length fights and any short fights as well. Obviously, he does have a bit of a delayed slow start until you actually get Corruption going, but once you do, you can kind of catch up, and your damage output is quite high up there. So sub 1 minute fight in Battlegrounds. Not too bad, but obviously you're not going to be fighting Deadpools in Battlegrounds. So what type of champions you can actually use Knull against? Should you choose him offensively? And this obviously is not going to be a full or complete list. It is going to be some of the more popular champions in Battlegrounds, I'd say. And here's going to be my 4-star rank 3 Knull, I think, going up against an infamous Iron Man. And this is going to be one of the party tricks of Knull that I'm going to showcase with his signature ability as well. Because the higher his signature ability is, the more effective his regeneration conversion to degen is. Basically, at max sig, whenever opponents would trigger regen below 50% health, it automatically and instantly gets replaced by one of Knull's degens. And we're going to see how it works excellent here, because we all know that Infamous Iron Man has quite a long and extremely potent regen that also power locks you whenever you are getting him below 15%. So that power lock often can be an absolute nightmare and annoying thing to deal with, and if you do not stop that regen, then he regains a ton of power. But see what happens here? His regen activated, but it immediately disappeared, and he got a very potent degen on him, and he just completely nuked that fight very quickly as well. So, Infamous Iron Man, awesome. Obviously, Omega Sentinel, Knull is going to be amazing to deal with Omega Sentinel, because you can continuously eat up all of her armor ups, therefore you don't ever really need to watch out for the combo. And because Omega Sentinel doesn't really have high health pool, he's going to go down quite quickly. It is interesting to note that she obviously doesn't take any bleed damage, but every time you bleed her, she will be activating her regen. Now, that regen in regular circumstances doesn't really do anything as long as you have Despair maxed, because you're going to be completely shutting down her regeneration rate. However, when Knull is awakened, you can see that whenever we activate that regen, we actually convert it into a degen. So Omega Sentinel is actually immediately completely melting, because every time you hit her with a light attack, she gets a regen from an instant bleed, and that gets converted into degen, and your damage output gets significantly improved. So that's quite a neat little interaction there. Obviously, some other random champions like Scorpion. Now, this fight isn't going to go perfect by any means, but he is a very solid Scorpion counter, because number one, obviously, you can stop him from evading. That is awesome. Number two, he's also like poison resistant. Therefore, what I'm going to showcase later in this fight, maybe not on purpose initially, but I did figure that I will leave it in, is that, for instance, fighting against Scorpion, even if you do get a poison on you, it's not going to be the end of the world to trigger it, because he's 65% poison resistant, and that also includes Scorpion's sting damage. So we're going to see that I have a poison on me now, and I will activate a special attack whilst that poison is going to be active. And we're going to see how little damage I will be taking. In between Inequity, in between his poison resistance, solid. And obviously, yes, you can completely shut down Scorpion's evades as well if you play a bit more carefully than I did. And other than that, Scorpion has relatively small health pool, and you're just going to be doing perfectly fine against Scorpio Boy and a ton of other random opponents in Battlegrounds. Here we can see we're putting some degens to work, not too bad. Now, he doesn't really want to throw a special attack, but because of Knull's reduced combat power rate, I was still able to be relatively aggressive and hit him significantly more than most champions would, and by the end of it, I actually healed back up relatively decently. Now, another matchup that can work, and again, this isn't going to be a perfect fight, but Knull is quite solid against Hulkling, primarily because, again, you do shut down vast majority of his healing. And then with Living Abyss, Inequities, putting in quite a lot of work for the block damage mitigation as well. And most importantly, we can see that later on, you are going to be able to eat up his regens once you're actually going to get going in this fight. So obviously, it's still not going to be the perfect or the fastest counter, but especially for stuff like Battlegrounds, you often need to make do with what you have at hand, not perfect counters. And it is very advantageous to know a lot of these less than standard or ideal matchups that can still work relatively well, and that is one way to get an upper hand. It's perfectly viable if need be for Alliance War or if need be for questing, and obviously in Battlegrounds as well. Especially, it's useful when you drop champions like Knull that can present both offensive and defensive threat. And just, drafting Knull, forcing opponent to get a counter for Knull, and then turning around and using Knull to nuke down a Hulkling or something can be extremely useful. And here, very, very soon, we're going to see that we're going to be completely eating all of his regions up whilst the corruption's active. It is important to note that you cannot do anything to those regions if the corruption is not active. But, so here I get clapped a little bit. Observe what happens there in just a second. So we got rid of the 2 existing regions there. We have 35 armor breaks, and now we're going to be hitting him. But every time he would get a regen, it just got converted in degen. So not that he was capable of healing virtually anything before, but now we even visually can see that he is not gaining those regeneration buffs because, well, as soon as he does, they just get converted into D. So it's quite interesting and useful interaction there as well. And now we're going to have, as I mentioned, one more unique thing about Knull, him being a cosmic champion with no real buffs, and obviously being able to prevent evades and auto blocks on his mediums and heavies. Mordor is a very, very, very excellent opponent for him, and here we can see exactly why, because you completely ignore one of the more annoying abilities of Mordor, which is that you can't hit him whilst he is parry stunned, and then the rest of the fight is becoming super easy. Now, the only danger again here is the Mystic Dispersion, which is the thing that really does annoy me. Now here, when he holds block, just drop a heavy attack suite. We can see that those buffs do get activated and immediately give him quite significant amounts of power. Really wish those were passive effects upon the activation of corruption, but unfortunately they are not. But still, the point stands. He's obviously extremely capable at dealing with Mordor and several other Mystic champions. I personally have used Knull in past against Mephisto in some of the Battlegrounds metas, and it worked out just fine. Here I accidentally do end up getting hit, but fair play. I was all scared that he's going to get to level 3, but fine. And now, yeah, we can see that Mordor is going down at a very solid pace. There's not much to worry. And completely ignoring all of those evades that he gets there. And the final matchup that's quite interesting that I'm going to show you, and this is going to be the final gameplay clip here, Knull going up against Killmonger. And the way it is interesting, a lot of people would automatically kind of dismiss Knull against Killmonger because initially you place so many buffs that you'd think that he's going to get to level 3 pretty much immediately. But a lot of people forget that Killmonger doesn't always get same amount of power whenever debuff is placed on him. What do I mean by that is quite simple. Killmonger receives power proportional to his missing power from level 3. Basically, the more power Killmonger already has, the less power he will receive when the debuffs are inflicted. So you actually are relatively free at debuffing Killmonger. Initially, yes, he will shoot up to level 2s, but it's not such a bad thing. And then obviously, once you enter Corruption, all of that reverb stuff gets shut down. You don't have really anything to worry about. His level 1 and his level 1 counter punches will still activate, I believe, which can be somewhat annoying. But other than that, there's nothing to worry about, and you can be super aggressive because he doesn't really gain power. He has reduced combat power rate based on how many armor breaks you have. Now, I think that I made another stupid mistake, but silly mistake. Clumsy mistake. But that was where the point stands, where you can just nuke down the Killmongers. Best. In the end there, I let him nuke me to get a cleaner fight. I forgot to cut out the first fight. But the point is, Knull is very, 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 very good Killmonger counter. A bit of a whoopsie at the end, but I'm not re-recording this half a minute long video. Speaking of, I do hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I do hope that this has been useful. Let me know if you like this type of format. I do hope to make more champion guides, reviews, breakdowns. I need to figure out how I'm gonna call them in near future. But yeah, that is it for now. And special shout out to Steve, who has been waiting for this Knull guide for a really long time. So my apologies for the delay. So yeah. Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about